Rebel with a Cause, Mark Twain's Hidden Memoirs, Aftword, A Farewell to Arms, 1910. Editor's Notes. When Twain says last year above, he was referring, of course, to 1909. In April, Clara and Ossip were called to Stormfield from Europe due to Twain's failing health. In My Father, Mark Twain, Clara wrote of their arrival. He was ready to talk, but spent no words on complaints about his illness. He was pathetically anxious to inform me about the financial state of affairs, expressing regret that there was less than he had hoped there would be. He appeared skeptical also as to whether the sale of his books would continue for more than a brief period after his death. I was too much moved by this evidence of his lingering care for me to trust myself to speak. On Thursday morning, the 21st of April, 1910, he awoke with mental clarity and vigor, but not inclined to converse. Then he dozed off. I was sitting by the bedside, when suddenly he opened his eyes, took my hand, and looked steadily into my face. Faintly, he murmured, "Goodbye, dear, if we meet." Halley's comet reached perihelion, made its closest approach to the Earth during its sojourn through the skies on April 19, 1910. Similar to how the last occurrence of the comet's perihelion came just prior to Twain's birth in 1835, 2 days later, on the 21st, Twain died at sunset in Stormfield. Old friend and neighbor Joseph Twitchell gave an emotional prayer at Twain's funeral service in New York. Immediately following that, Twitchell was summoned home to the deathbed of his wife, Harmony. Twain's eulogy was delivered by Henry Van Dyke. In it he said, "We are here reminded of the frailty of mortal flesh and the brevity of our way on earth. We think of Mark Twain not as a celebrity, but as a man whom we loved. We remember the reality that made his life worth living, his laughing enmity of all sham, his love for the truth, his honesty, his honor. We know how he met with adversity, toiling years to pay a debt of conscience, following the injunction to do all things honorably as well as all things honestly. We know how he loved his family and his fellow men. We knew Mark Twain and we loved him. Nothing is more false than to think that the presence of humor means the absence of seriousness. It was the showing up of the unreal sham, the untruth, that made Mark Twain's humor. He was serious in his real humor. But we know that Mark Twain never laughed at the frail, the weak, the poor, and the humble. He used his humor but for things good and wholesome. He made fun without hatred. He laughed many of the world's false claimants out of court. Under all his humor, he made us feel the pathos of life's realities, for he exposed the sham. Now that he is gone, we who loved him, and we all loved him who knew him, will miss him. We are glad to give thanks that he left such an honorable name. To name just a few among others present at Twain's first funeral service, there was another private ceremony the following day in Elmira, where William Dean Howells, Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Carnegie, Sidney Porter, O. Henry, who died a month and a half later at the age of 47, Robert Underwood Johnson, who was a supporter of and collaborator with Twain's close contemporary John Muir, and Henry H. Rogers, Jr. 4 months after his death, a girl who was to be Twain's only grandchild, Nina Clemens Gabrilowitsch, was born at Stormfield to Twain's daughter Clara and her concert pianist husband, Osip Gabrilowitsch. In the epilogue to her poignant book, Mark Twain and Me, which was written in middle age, Dorothy Quick explained what she had intended to achieve with the work. I have tried to write this book through the little girl's eyes, not through my own grown-up ones, because I felt that only that way could I give the right picture of the Mark Twain I knew and loved, the portrait that I am sure is what he would want. Show me as I was, Dorothy, the real me. I can almost hear his slow, drawly voice saying. And at the very conclusion of her book, Quick summed up Twain's lasting influence and impact on her. To have known him as I did was a rare gift, which, as the years go by, I appreciate more and more fully. Just to have revolved in his radius for a few brief years was an unforgettable privilege. To have had his love and his interest, his faith that I would accomplish something, was even greater, and the desire to fulfill his hopes for me will always remain an integral part of my being, a goal I will strive constantly to achieve. But one thing is certain, whether I make a success of writing or not. Mark Twain brought more into the life of this little girl than anyone could guess. Entirely apart from the literary angle, the influence of a man like Mark Twain in a child's life is incalculable. I don't know how the other angelfish feel, but I am sure it must be the same with them as it is with me. For the time we knew him, we lived in a rarefied atmosphere in which all things of life seemed to assume their true and proper proportions. We learned the simplicity of the great and the unassumption of the rich and true heart that held honor before everything and exalted right thinking and living to its highest degree. The very fact of having been in such an atmosphere cannot help but clear the lungs of the murky dust of everyday life. It cannot help but give an incentive to carry on, to try to be as noble and as fine as he was in every way. And that is the heritage that Mark Twain has not only given to me, who loved him, but to the whole world.